Quick quiz. What injury law firm has been helping people in the District, Maryland, and Virginia for over 35 years? That's right, it's Greenberg and Betterman. Auto accident? Medical malpractice? Get a free consultation by visiting gblawyers.com and feel better.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to go back to high school, right? And it seems like, at least to me, across the board, no matter who you are or where you went to school, everybody had a lunch table crew. Your lunch table crew was basically the people that you kicked it with at lunchtime. And for some people, that was the only time they kicked it, but the lunchroom was a special place. And I came to this idea from listening to my man B. Cox at the Vault Classic Music Review podcast. Shout out to B. Cox and the crew. On one of his podcasts, they were talking about, he and the guys from the crew were talking about the fact of them kind of getting together at lunchtime and, you know, being in school and the things that happened as far as like how they would talk about music. And it got me to thinking about just those same things that happened when I was in high school back in the day at the lunch table. And what was interesting was a couple of things. When I look back on it, I'm amazed at really what I remember, because I actually remember a lot of stuff, given the fact that at the time of this recording, I've been out of high school for 25 plus years. That being said, lunchtime was cool. It was dope. We had, let me just tell you about my lunch table crew. My lunch table crew, honestly, really wasn't that deep. My lunch table crew consisted of me and two other people, two of my closest friends. My homeboy Shaft, and Shaft and I, we've been tight since like 8th grade, and 7th, 8th grade, I can't even remember. And my homegirl Jamel, and Jamel and I've known Jamel since I was like 8 years old. So we go way back, and she is one of the, you know, closest people to me, even to this day. And we would just kick it, just the three of us. And what was interesting was, like, I had other friends, other close friends. I had other people in my crew, but for some reason, like Jay Fresh or my boy Zell or Derek, we never had lunch together. I don't know how that worked out, but in the 4 years of high school, we never had lunch together. So I just remember always being with Shaft and Jamel. And Jamel is a year younger than me and Shaft. So she kicked it with us for, 3 years. And but that was my crew. Like, I ain't really lunchtime. And obviously, as many of you know, maybe you don't know, when I was in high school, I played football too. So I had teammates, but I never sat with my teammates at lunch. I never hung out with anybody else but Jamel and Shaft. So that was our lunch table crew. Now, what was always interesting about lunch was what you talked about. Looking back on it, and when I think back to those times, and we're talking, I graduated high school in 1991, right? And when I look back at that time in my high school, Wilson High School in Florence, South Carolina, it's a predominantly black high school, right? So it's probably, back then it was probably about 90% black, 90% black, maybe 10% white. And I think I could say this about most schools, no matter what the racial makeup was, the lunchroom might have been the most segregated portion of the day. Because at one table, you might have the nerds. At another table, you might have the jocks. At another table, you might have mostly white kids. Depending on the racial makeup at your school, you may have, let's say if you're a predominantly white high school, you might have a bunch of black kids at, their different tables. And again, you got the jocks, and then at another table, you might have the kids who are the artsy kids, or the kids who are in band. They might, they kind of congregate and kind of sit together. And then, you might have the kids who are just, I don't know, troublemakers, outcasts. They may be sitting at another table or a couple other tables. And then you would always have, the, or at least in the high school that I went to, you'd have the rapper table. I mean, like where, rappers or break dancers or whatever, they would sit together. So to say that the lunchroom was very cliquish was an understatement. And I would welcome you after you listen to this podcast, hit me up and tell me how your lunchroom situation was, because I found that it was very segregated. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it's just what it is. I think at that particular time, and probably even to this day, people tend to flock to those who, either look like them or have similar interests. It's just the nature of who we are and where we are. I guess that's pretty much probably the easiest thing that I could say about it, because that's just people, in general. But at our lunch table, I mean, like, our conversations would range and vary. One day you might be talking about sports, and that might just dominate the conversation. And like for the three of us, it was nothing for us to talk about sports because all of us love basketball. Like I said, Shaft played basketball. I played football. So that was always the topic of conversation. So just the three of us talking sports. And then obviously, if you're anything like us, we would be at the lunch table and, we'd be talking about people. Because obviously, the rumor mill always runs. And, I forgot one other clique, the pretty girls. Everybody had that little, I don't care where you went to school. Everybody had that little clique or crew of fly girls and who were really dope or whatever the case may be. And they just kind of ran together. And, we had our own issues or rumors or whatever the case was about those that ran together. And, honestly, the girls who had a rep, pretty much a lot of them ran together. So they kind of sat at the table. I'm not going to call them any names, but, the girls who had, who's out there, they kind of ran together too. So they were at a table too, a couple of tables too. So again, it was very, very segregated and segmented, but if you could put a camera or a microphone at every table, the conversations were always interesting. But again, our conversation always started with, it might start with sports, and then it might go to people. And, talking about people, again, in high school was just something that you did. It was never, at least from what I can remember with me and my crew, it was never anything malicious. But, if we knew something, it'd get talked about. Suffice to say, I mean, lunch was lunch. I mean, you got food on the table. So, I mean, that goes without saying. But over the conversations, we would have over, I don't know, the rectangular pizza, French fries and things of that nature like that. Lunch was cool in high school. It wasn't, we didn't have bad lunches. We had pretty cool lunches, but, it wasn't nothing that was going to fill you up. And I laugh when I think about, some of the kids of today, because, you walk in these high schools and they have, places where you can, like fast food places in the school, or you can get that type of food, or better yet, you can actually leave the campus and go get some food, which that could never happen when I was in high school. You couldn't leave campus. Once you were on campus, you had to be there. But yeah, so our conversations would kind of go around like that. So you would see different crews and you see different people or whatever the case may be. One other thing that we always talked about, obviously, was music. Music was very important. It was something that obviously would dominate the conversation. And, you know, every now and then, maybe every other day, someone would start beating on the table. And next thing you know, somebody's rapping. And that was always interesting because I think a lot of times, you know, that was where the cats who were really serious about rapping could freestyle. And back then you had to, if you were going to freestyle, it had to be off the top of the dome. It couldn't be something that you wrote down, that that you rehearsed or anything like that. And, you know, someone would beat on the table and then, you know, circle would form. You got your, next thing you know, you got yourself a little cipher, right? So you got your cipher and someone's beating on the table and someone's rapping and they're just, for the most part, they're trying to rhyme words. But, you know, every now and then you have one or two cats that could really, really rhyme. And my school was the same way. I mean, we had some dudes at Wilson that could rhyme. So yeah, it always started with like sports, then people, then music. And it was always interesting because, again, you look around the cafeteria and, you know, you would just see different people at different lunch tables. And the tables, at least at my school, kind of became what the people were known for. So, like, let's say the table closest to the right window, that might have been the football players' table. And so, like, literally, it was kind of understood, but you couldn't sit at that you couldn't sit at that table. I mean, like, and even like the nerd table, like if you, and this is funny to say, but if you weren't a nerd, you couldn't sit at the nerd's table. I mean, like, I know that sounds bugged out, like the nerd is going to fight you about sitting at the table, but everybody kind of had like their own table. And so that was always interesting. But my lunchroom crew, man, we that's what we did every day. And we always had fun. Like the lunch period would go by so fast. I think we probably had, 40 minutes for lunch, I guess. If my memory serves me correct, 40, 45 minutes maybe. But the time always went by fast. And like I said, my high school in particular, Wilson High School, was a predominantly black high school. But we didn't have, and I guess maybe because we were predominantly black, we didn't have any racial issues. I mean, the white kids were cool. Everybody seemed, at least from what I could tell back then, everybody got along. So, you know, there wasn't any issues as far as, you know, wanting to beat up people or having any race wars or anything like that. I'm very familiar with, you know, some of the stories that came from the other high schools in my town. But, you know, we didn't have those kind of issues. But the lunch table crew was just that. I mean, we just kicked it, and, you know, we kind of, okay, let me be honest. We made fun of people, but it wasn't anything malicious. But we just enjoyed kicking it, man. We really did. Given the fact that I played football, I had a different perspective on it. So it was like, I just really tried to blend in. I think when people talk about their high school days, you know, it's common knowledge that some people, you know, were more popular than others. Was I popular? Given the fact that I played sports, I would say that I was. I like to say high visibility. But I was in a bunch of activities and stuff like that. But whatever level of popularity I had, it didn't bother me one way or the other. In fact, I would have much rather been low key, incognito or whatever the case may be. I didn't, whatever light that was shined on me, I didn't want it. But it was always interesting because people have certain assumptions about you because you play sports or you do this or you do that. And it's interesting because when you're at the lunch table, most of the people that I'm talking about, their worlds don't collide at the lunchroom. Like, you could be, like, we had our table, right? And the nerd table was right beside our table. And like, we never spoke to those kids. And like, they never said anything to us. And it was never any beef or anything like that. But, we just didn't, And so that was interesting. Again, my boy Shaft, he played basketball. He was one of the stars on the basketball team. So another high visibility kid. And, so it was always interesting at, the conversations, or you would see people kind of talking like after a basketball game or whatever like that. We just come and just sit down. And I remember distinctly hearing one girl saying, she was whispering something about, him or whatever, because I think we lost the game or something. Like, we had a really good basketball team. And, she was whispering something about it or whatever like that. And I'm like, damn, you just going to whisper it out? Like, this is my man, and you're going to say this right here beside me? But, it was just high school. But again, very cliquish, very crewish. The pretty girls. Interesting clique. I'll say this. They were very intriguing. And who, if you went to high school with me, you know who you are. So I'm not I'm not gonna call any names. But yeah, it was always interesting because every class and every school had the pretty girls, the fly girls. Those would, if you could take 1991 and fast forward to 2021, those would be the girls that would be on Instagram, with several hundred followers. But the pretty girls were they were a different breed, and I was always interested in and we used to talk about this too, the hierarchy of the pretty girl crew. Because there's always one. She's got to be the leader. And you could tell because, like, we would watch them. And when it was time, like, let's say it was time for lunch to be about over, the leader would get up and go put her food away or go put her tray away, and the rest would follow. And again, these are the pretty girls. So you think that, okay, I can stand on my own too. I'm not worried about my crew, whatever the case may be. But there was always a leader. So yeah, and we used to laugh about it. I used to laugh with Jamel. And here's the thing, Jamel was, and she still is, one of the smartest people I know, and she's one of the smartest people in the school. And she was pretty, but she didn't run with the pretty girl crew, whatever the case may be. She ran with us. So that dynamic was always interesting. Again, I went to a black high school, so our band, the band cast were just different. Like they had their own little thing. And there's a certain little arrogance about people that play on the band. And that was cool. And like, it's funny because like my little brother was on the band. And so, but I was always happy for any success that the band members had. But like when they got at their little table, the band, I mean, like it would be nothing for the band people at their table to make a bunch of noise. Them and the rappers, the rap crew, they would make a lot of noise, obviously, but it would always be, and it was funny, like anytime you had somebody rapping or beating on the table, there would always be like security guard or somebody come over and tell them to be quiet. I mean, like, what? I mean, like, come on, man. We're in high school. But yeah, it was very interesting. The lunch table crew was we had a good time, and I remember those days, and I remember some of those conversations. And again, I'm not going to name any names, but for those who are listening who went to high school with me, they know who I'm talking about. But yeah, and then I mean, obviously you had the thug crew. The kids who were just a little rough around the edges. Kids who got into a little bit more trouble than the average kid. And then you had some kids, honestly, who just didn't have a lot. And it's interesting because I remember having this conversation with my sons when they were in high school. And I was telling them, I was like, look, you're privileged in the fact that you go to a high school where everybody's kind of, you go to this theme school and everybody's in uniforms, and parents drop them off in nice cars, and they go back home to 2-parent homes and live in this lifestyle or whatever the case may be. But I was like, I went to high school with kids who, if they didn't come to school, they didn't know when they were going to eat. Kids like that. It was a lot of kids like that, and who just were less fortunate and they just didn't have. So you never made fun of those kids, but you knew that they existed, and they might come to school with clothes that might be a little bit dirty, or they might be a little smelly because they've been wearing them. They might have worn the same pair of jeans 3 out of the 5 days. But it was what it was. You didn't make any fun of them, but in our lunch table, we just they were accepted. I think for the most part we accepted everybody. But we did make mental notes of certain things that we saw. There was always interesting times when the jocks, whether it be football players or basketball players, kind of had run-ins with people. Because, perfect example. Like, I remember, again, the nerd table was right next to my table. And I remember one of the cats from the football team, he came, we had pizza one day, and he was like, he just walked over to the nerd table and he asked this kid, he was like, yo, Billy, you want that pizza? And he almost put his finger in the pizza. And I mean, Billy's like, I don't know, 105 pounds, soaking wet. What's he going to say? He's not going to tell him you can't have my pizza, but he really wanted to eat that pizza. But, I mean, he gave it up because he didn't want to, or what he thought might happen. It was a little stuff like that. But I really enjoyed, kicking it with the lunch table crew. And I really enjoyed, like I said, one of my favorite memories was, watching cats beatbox and beat on the table and rhyme. That was funny. And then we always had the cats who were funny, who would just, tell jokes on each other all day. So that was funny too. But it was always an interesting dynamic. Again, at a predominantly black high school, even amongst the black students, very segregated and segmented. But yeah, man. So I just had to get on here and talk about what it was like at my school with my lunch table crew. Hit me up. Let me know if you've got a crew, or if you how the things were when you sat down and ate lunch in high school. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'll catch you guys next time. 5Gs.
If you work in university maintenance, Grainger considers you an MVP because your playbook ensures your arena is always ready for tip-off. And Grainger is your trusted partner, offering the products you need all in one place, from HVAC and plumbing supplies to lighting and more. And all delivered with plenty of time left on the clock, so your team always gets the win. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, visit Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Quick quiz. What injury law firm has been helping people in the District, Maryland, and Virginia for over 35 years? That's right, it's Greenberg and Betterman. Auto accident, medical malpractice. Get a free consultation by visiting gblawyers.com and feel better.